Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another great webinar from CPA Academy. My name is Beryl Young, and I'm happy to welcome you into today's webinar on D&I One-on-One, the value of a DEI leader. Our presenter today is Jina Etienne with special guest Jessica Gilbert. Before we get started, I wanted to go through some housekeeping items and do some technical checks to make sure everything is working. First, if you don't mind going into the GoToWebinars questions tab on your control panel and letting me know you can hear my voice and see the title slide. Feel free to let me know what city you're listening in from. If anyone is having technical trouble, please let me know in that questions panel. Please keep in mind, there are quite a few of you, and I'll do my best to get around to each of you as quickly as I can. This is also where you can put in your questions and comments for our presenters. I'm checking on that questions panel, and I can see you all chiming in from all over. Hello, New Mexico, Santa Barbara. Great, I can see that everything is working. Now let's go through some housekeeping. This is a one CPE webinar. The way you earn that credit is fairly straightforward. Just stay logged in for 50 minutes and answer the poll questions. We'll have a total number of 4 polls during today's webinar, and to earn full credit, you'll need to answer at least 3 of them. If you're on a mobile device, you might need to click your answer a few times and scroll down to the submit button. And if you have to log out and log back in again for any reason, our system will keep track of your time. CPE will be issued by the end of the day today and will be available in your CPA Academy account. I wanted to let you know we are recording today's webinar, and the archive along with your CPE credit will be available in your CPA Academy account within 24 hours. We also recommend that you download today's presentation materials, which can be found in the control panel's handouts tab. Now that we're all set, let's welcome our presenters, Jina and Jessica. The floor is all yours.
Thank you, Beryl, and everyone, welcome. I'm so happy that you are joining us again. You know, many of you know this is a biweekly webinar series where I bring some folks in and we have a conversation just one-on-one to talk about something. And today, I'm excited to have with me Jessica Gilbert, and we're going to be talking about what a DEI leader brings, what's the value that they offer to an organization. So let's start as usual by introduction. So unfortunately, Jessica's camera isn't on. You guys have to look at me the whole time. For that, I apologize. But you can see her beautiful picture here, Jessica. She and I are part of a Facebook group, D&I practitioners, and that's where we connected originally over the conversations about allyship. And those conversations led to conversations about what does a DEI leader do. Jessica's very passionate about D&I and is a certified diversity executive, as you can see here. And she understands the role that DEI practitioners play inside of an organization. So Jessica, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you, Jina. I'm happy to be here, and I am glad that I saw your post and the solicitation to have some conversation around this topic. I think you and I, after we connected to learn more about what you were looking to offer, the opportunity was around how to even create allyship within the DEI space in the organization. So I'm happy to have a little bit of a deeper conversation about that today.
And so, you know, it's interesting because the first question I usually ask my guests is, why is this conversation? You know, we settled on talking about the value of a DEI leader. So I'm curious if you can share for our audience, why is this conversation particularly important to you?
Certainly. Well, I, first started working in this space back in 2003 as a diversity coordinator within healthcare. And for as long as we know that, diversity and inclusion has been part of, any part of the conversation in the workplace, that's, 50 years old. But part of what I noticed was lacking is the conversation around what this role is to bring. We talk about the outcomes, we talk about the intent of the work, but not necessarily around what some of the qualifications or what the value that this individual with this developed skill set can offer to an organization and bring in this role.
I couldn't agree with you more. And oh, by the way, Christopher's asking, certified by whom? It's the Institute for Diversity Certification. Isn't that what it's called, Jessica?
Yes, the Institute for Diversity Certification.
Right. And so they issue certifications for diversity professionals and diversity executives. And so, well, let's jump into the conversation. And by the way, I invite everyone to submit questions as we go along. I try to throw them out there, or certainly your comments and your feedback as well. I'll be monitoring it while Jessica is going to be doing all the heavy lifting and all the talking. So Jessica, let's move forward on this slide. These are the different things that you wanted to make sure that oh, before we do that, we got to do a polling question or we are going to get in trouble. So let's do our first polling question about worst place, Beryl.
There you go. The first of our full 4 polling questions is up on your screen. Please go ahead and submit your answer now. We are going to leave this poll open for about a minute, but please get your answer in as quickly as you are able to. As a reminder, we will have 4 polls during the presentation, and you need to answer at least 3 of them to earn credit. Question for this poll is, where is the worst place you could get stuck?
Elevator, a plane, at home, or maybe you don't want to answer. I am so curious about this question myself. So I can see here that we still have about 15 seconds to go.
Thank you for getting your votes in quickly. And we'll be shutting this poll, our first poll question, down in 3, 2, and 1. Here are your results of poll question number 1. Back over to you.
53% said in an elevator, 36% said in a plane, 4% said at home, 7% preferred not to answer. And Anthony said, I want to answer, but it would be none of those. So that is a fair point, Anthony, but unfortunately we don't have an open-ended, you can type in whatever you want. But Jessica, that was a question you had proposed. Do you want to share what the thinking was behind that?
So in all transparency, it was one of the many questions that I had on a list for rapid fire conversation with the leader a couple of years ago. But I also think for the at home that answer may have looked different if we asked that at the beginning of this year, if we asked it this time last year, as to how people were feeling relative to having to quarantine and being forced to work from home, who felt stuck versus feeling relieved that they didn't have to go out and commute. I know that was a point of anxiety for a lot of people, feeling stuck at home versus the opportunity to be safe at home, if you will.
Right. Oh, no, that's a really good point. And we know that working from home has changed for so many of us what is the culture of an organization, which ties us back into today's session, where on the list we have here the competencies of a DEI leader, the passion versus capabilities. Are they a manager versus a leader? Those are important distinctions. Budget, effectiveness, types of programs, and decision making. So I'm going to just kind of leave it on this next slide so everybody can you're not on camera so that they can see you. But talking about some of those questions, then you have passion versus capabilities. You want to talk about that?
Sure. And I apologize for not being on camera. So when we think about, having a dedicated, role or space for someone to lead diversity and inclusion, diversity, equity and inclusion and belonging, all the things that come with that acronym now, it's always a matter of, how do we qualify someone to lead this function? And part of the discussions that I've observed or, read about is where it should be grassroots versus bringing in an executive. I've had the opportunity to work in different workplaces where I've worked alongside or have, met people who are passionate about diversity. And while, having passion around, any area of work is wonderful, passion in and of itself is not a competency. Your love for, for people or learning about different people and backgrounds is very different than leading a conversation around how to address those topics, particularly when it comes to conflict. As an example, someone having the capabilities or the ability to do something, to the extent of their ability is a developed competency or skill set that you have to work on the way that you would with any other function or area of operation in the organization. An example that I think about when it comes to, being competent is, and this will date me, but when I first started to learn how to manage my finances, I used to, pride myself on and was very passionate about keeping a balanced checkbook, wanting to make sure that, my transactions all aligned with receipts and things like that. But that nowhere near qualified me to, and then or today, to then lead an accounting or any kind of finance function in an organization. Two completely, different things. I love to sing, but you would never find me leading a solo. So someone's passionate around something doesn't necessarily equate to qualifying them to lead, a diversity effort. So similar, when I think about, people's love for people and culture is different than actually having a competency. So the need to distinguish between that when you think about people who are in place, not to take away from their effort and desire to do good work, but it is in fact a skill set the same way that you would qualify someone's abilities or competencies in any other area or function in your organization.
I think that's, by the way, I like the idea that you said you like to sing, but you're not going to see me singing a solo. I was like, we should do a duet at the end. That'll make people stay just to hear us hackle at the end of this. But anyway, one of the things that we know has been happening across organizations as the commitment or as the interest in creating, rolling out, demonstrating a commitment to D&I has increased, particularly after the murder of George Floyd, and that's change that has happened across society. Organizations didn't have a person in place, or they didn't have a team in place. And so what they would do is tap somebody on the shoulder to then do the work. So they weren't somebody who had these competencies. They might not have even had the passion to do the work, even if they're passionate for the work to be done. And as a result, oftentimes the people being tapped were the very minorities within the organizations themselves, whether they're an underrepresented member of an underrepresented group, a woman in a predominantly male business, and so on. And so it was someone that was in a minority category that was tapped. What is your thinking about that? Because passion, you just talked about it, and I'm thinking passion for the work versus passion for the work to being done in an organization. Does that make sense?
It does make sense, and that touches on a lot of points, Jina. So right or wrong, I know colleagues who in the last year have, been dealt the responsibility of being more involved in this space than that they would have liked to, because it wasn't their primary and isn't their primary function, and again, or their skill set. I think that even with good intentions, you can have, an impact that can backfire by placing people in with that responsibility. On the other hand, there are, depending on, what your existing, work culture is and the way communication already exists in your organization, that sometimes organic conversations can happen to address things at the time. Still different than leading an enterprise-wide effort, if you will. So addressing and reacting to real-time events and issues that are happening in real life that we know people bring into the workplace. Certainly addressing those things in a timely fashion is important. But I think that's where, if you don't have a dedicated person internally, is where the value of reaching out and using consultants to help guide those conversations. That way that there is someone who's got the training and objectivity to help moderate conversations that have effective outcomes.
You threw a word in there that's near and dear to my heart. You said budget. and it's the second to the last bullet on that previous slide. Budgeting for DEI. So if we don't mind jumping around,
sure.
Tap somebody on the shoulder and you ask them to do the work. Either they're doing it on top of their existing job, or they're given space to do it, but not necessarily a budget. Why is a budget so important? Is it enough for the company to just say, look, we're giving you the space and the time to do it?
Yeah, understanding, what kind of financial commitment, and of course, that's going to vary depending on the organization. And quite frankly, it will vary depending on what you're looking to accomplish. So budgeting for DEI can be anything from, do we, dedicate the funds for an FTE, or are we going to go the, consultant route? If we have an FTE, are we going to give them, give this role its own budget? Because doing the work does cost. It can cost to train, it can cost to consult, it costs to, to sponsor events in the community. So there's very little that there wouldn't be some expectation for, financial commitment, however you slice and dice that. But understanding what that is, as much as you can understand what that is beforehand, the easier it is to help manage and have clear goals and expectations so that you can then measure your own effectiveness, over time, against what you set out to do. So having the financial conversation is as important as the are we ready to do this, or do we support diversity and inclusion? You have to have the financial conversation as well.
Right. I wrote down a couple of things here about opportunity costs that you talked about. I want to make a note here, the competencies, because I want to make sure we actually walk through some of those competencies. But before we get there, opportunity cost popped into my mind about, let's just say we're tapping Karen on the shoulder, and Karen is now, who's our budget analyst, is also going to be the one who's going to lead D&I for the organization. Karen's enthusiastic about this. She's excited. She's been supporting these efforts. Karen doesn't get a budget, but Karen gets time. So, Karen, we want you have up to, 10 hours a week. So, 25% of your work day, your work year can be dedicated to this. Is there an opportunity cost, though, for Karen? Because if the leadership doesn't value that work, perhaps it's a check the box activity. Or if her manager doesn't value that work, yay, I'm glad leadership supports it, but I need you to, get this project work done. Is there an opportunity cost then to the individual, their career, promotions, and advancement opportunities, when they don't have the necessarily skills, competencies, or a budget to do meaningful and effective work? Does that make sense?
It does make sense. And I think the best way to respond in this scenario is that, for, Karen, who's been, tasked with, some specific deliverables relative to this space, that those would be articulated in writing. So similarly, if I imagine, let's say she's in an organization where they've got, KPIs or OKRs, and this is one of those things that she'd be measured against that the way she would be any other deliverable. Should she meet that, or because it's an ad hoc opportunity for her, then maybe perhaps it's treated as a bonus, area. But certainly it's not, I would hope that Karen would not have been asked to deliver on something that's beyond her capabilities. That's setting someone up for failure. So, but in a way that there's some agreed upon goal or metric that's been established, that she'd be, assessed against that the way she would any other part of her work, but with some kind of incentive attached to it, if it in fact is going to be, a temporary opportunity for her to contribute in this way.
So then you talked about it several times. Let's start walking through that list. What are the competencies? What are the skills and that somebody who's the DEI leader need to have?
Sure. So, I mean, I think that, on the one hand, we could go on about what, some core competencies or qualities that any effective leader would have, but specific in this space would be things like, understanding, bias, being able to understand and lead through cultural competency, leading through, microaggressions in the organization, social justice development. These are all not all inclusive, but some of the qualities that you specifically want someone to be comfortable with, either themselves guiding through and or having the resources to bring that information and capability into the workplace. The other part of that is emotional intelligence, and I would say that whether we're including this DEI leader, but for any leader or individual that's going to endeavor in this work, is that you are aware of where you are in this journey and in this conversation around diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. How in touch are you with what your worldview is relative to any of those topics? Because it starts there before you can lead anybody else. So, so that to me would be first and foremost before being able to address any of the things that I just mentioned. Having that level of awareness helps you then to adjust and adapt to to multiple audiences, leadership versus employee base versus organizational culture, depending on the company that you are that you're working with.
Something that you just described, I wrote down the word authenticity, and it just popped in my head because you have to, as part of being a DEI leader, you have to be able to walk the walk and talk the talk. And the reason I thought of it is you said, knowing where you are in your own journey, where you are in your own growth. How important is that then? Isn't it enough for the DEI leader to be a subject matter expert? They really know how to crunch this data. They can tell you about all the history between the different groups and barriers and challenges, etc. Is that good enough?
I think part of what this work is being able to relate to your audience and building trust. This psychological safety is what comes to mind for me, is that this leader needs to have the space and the trust needs to have been established, which is the responsibility is a two-way responsibility, by the way, to be able to bring their authentic self in their work. I think that when you have the freedom and are able to leverage your authenticity, then everything you named comes forth in a way that resonates best with the teams that that you work with, and I think particularly at the leadership level. So I'd say that as impressive as it is to be knowledgeable across a broad spectrum of topics, which I'd be amazed and impressed by the DEI leader who knew everything about everything there is to know in this space. That's probably not a large population, but I think it starts with being able to bring your authentic self, in addition to then most effectively be able to lead in the areas that we've discussed.
Well, just now you said jokingly, know everything there is to know about everything. The reality of some of this work is that it is truly a journey, number one.
Yeah.
There isn't enough time in the day or hours or weeks or years that we're going to solve, quote unquote, this problem.
Right.
If you even want to call it a problem so much as a challenge. And so part of it is that it's a sea change in how we see, value, and support our workforce, what we see in the workforce and then value it. So you can't know everything because we don't know what everything is yet. So that's part of it. And then the other part of it is, even if we could name the 10 things that we need to know, they're going to change. And so there's some danger in thinking that you know what DEI is supposed to be. I'm putting that in super, like 3 quotes here.
Yeah, so I think that's you're spot on, Jina, with that. I think that what kind of encapsulates that is that an effective, or the value that a DEI leader will bring to an organization is that they're going to help an organization lead in how to think about this work, as opposed to what to think about the work. What to think is going to change. This conversation, around any demographic or some of the different dimensions of diversity has evolved since the conversation around DEI. I mean, just even the name of this space now is not just D&I anymore, it's DEI, DEIB, and all those things. All of that has evolved, over time, and will continue to, because as people, that's in society, that's what happens. So the goal and the distinguishing quality is helping people through how to think about it, not what, because we all have access to that information, but then what do you do with it when you got it? So I think that's something that's important to think about for anyone. So even if you're not in this space in particular, have a dedicated title for D&I, is to understand that the work changes, and it's a constant moving, because people shift, and there's no way to stay ahead of it per se, but it is a way to acknowledge that the changes and how to anticipate how those are going to impact the workforce.
So another bullet on your list is effective DEI leader partnership. And so who are they partnering with? Actually, you know what? I want to ask this next polling question. I don't think it's the right order. Hold on. Let me see. Which one is it? Yeah, that's the second one. Beryl, could we launch the second poll so we have those answers before we start?
Dedicated DEI leadership question. Yep. All right. I have launched poll question number 2 of 4 on your screen. Dedicated DEI leadership is necessary. True, false, or not sure? Leave this poll question open for about a minute. And again, this is the second of 4 polls, and you'll need to answer at least 3 of them to earn credit for today's session.
So while that poll question is open, I just have to share. You know, Jessica, when I was joking earlier about singing, one of our attendees said, let's all unmute and sing. And I thought, now that sounds like a terrible idea. Funny, but terrible.
Yeah, I get, I'm the point of jokes in my household about, you know, whether or not my perception of my singing abilities versus what other people actually hear. And
That's hilarious.
I'm singing, but my rating is very different than the audience rating.
Well, I think the results are in.
There are the results of poll question number 2.
And they are promising. Well, so 68% said, yes, it's true that dedicated DEI leadership is necessary. But then we had 25% say not sure. So do you want to speak to the not sures?
Yeah, I think so. This is great. And thank you, participants, for your honesty. I think this is where one of the references or resources that I shared with you, Jina, on Diversity, Inc. by Pamela Newkirk speaks to, I think, what we see in some of these results. When you've got departments and they're not necessarily delivering, you can't really feel where the impact is. I think that's the combination of a number of things. You can have, the dedicated space and people still feel like they're seeing mistreatment or misbehavior that's happening, which can make you question the value or effectiveness. You can see people with the titles, but maybe not with the decision-making authority to drive change and impact change the way you want, which can, again, make you question whether or not you've got it. And then, there's also the, transparency and communication as to the state or condition of company culture as to how leadership addresses those gaps. So you can have, a fully functional, everyone's getting along, but there's still things that if you just look at numbers, or if you were to peel back a couple of layers of the onion, but nobody's really talking about it, there could be, mass exodus, and other things going up, and no one's talking about it, and there's no effort to address it. That may make you feel like, if no one's thinking that this is important enough, then maybe we don't need it, or that's not the issue. So for folks who are on the fence, I'd rather people be on the fence because it helps and forces people to then justify what it is that they're looking to address. Rather than diving in and it not really having the impact that it's intended to. This work is about growth. It's about having an impact, but it's also, it's hard work. And it means talking about things that, typically and historically, even with the best efforts, people have avoided just addressing head on. And Diversity, Inc. In particular talks about that. It's where within the diversity space as professionals have failed to bring the full impact of what is intended in this work, because we still wouldn't be talking about it the way that we are here 50 years from its inception. So so if you've got the time, if you're interested, this is not necessarily all about the failings, but it is addressing how we've not quite gotten fully comfortable with just addressing things head on for the sake of wanting to make it a feel-good effort, if you will, and trying to build measurement around that.
Right. So I don't know if you can see the screens, Jessica, but I did move us forward to the slide. You've listed a couple of books here. You have Diversity Inc., which you've been talking about. You also have Atomic Habits, Drive
Yes.
by Daniel Pink, which is an interesting choice because we don't know Daniel Pink as the guy that does the D&I stuff, or Atomic Habits for that matter. And then you have Diversity Beyond Lip Service. You want to, I guess I'm jumping really far now, but is there thinking behind these particular books that you want to share with our audience?
Yes. So, like I mentioned, I just talked about the Diversity Inc. Atomic Habits. So I completed this a couple of months ago. I did an audio book, and I was probably halfway through the book, and I was like, everybody needs to read this book. But I like Atomic Habits. I recommend this because it isn't a diversity read, but it is about how to make small changes that, then become habits. And I think that when we think about, like I mentioned before, with this work really starting with understanding what our worldview is,
Right.
if you are, at work or, in your personal life, having conversations as to, what and how can I do or think differently. This book came to mind as one way as how to take something small and build on that, rather than waking up the next day thinking you're going to be a completely different person or thinking about the world in a completely different way. It doesn't happen that way. The thing that I liked about this book also is that towards the end, it talks about having an accountability circle. So it's not just in your heart and in your mind, and that's where this commitment to change happens, but it is sharing it with people who can then hold you accountable to change until it becomes, second nature to you. Drive, this was a recommended book to me a couple of years ago, but this is just understanding what motivates people, and you don't have to necessarily think in the traditional D&I, DEI terms that we're talking about now. But this is just understanding what it is that motivates you, yourself in your work, and then how you can then better identify and discover what motivates your teams. So if you lead teams, or if you're, or just working with colleagues, to better, enhance your interactions and communications with people, understanding what drives people. We know generally that, today's workforce, they're driven by purpose. And more are they becoming more articulate about wanting to identify with organizations where they're clear about the organization's purpose and what they stand around social causes and things like that. So this, I felt like, would be a nice read to complement this overall topic. And then, of course, Diversity Beyond Lip Service. Unlike Diversity Inc., Diversity Beyond Lip Service is how to make sure that what you're working on gains traction, and that it doesn't, dissipate in the air of just a conversation about what you intend to do. And it does give some practical guides as to how to, lead conversations and to address some of the blind spots that organizations or leaders can fall into as part of this discussion.
So I actually thought about another book. I was writing it down. I was looking over here on my bookshelf, Start with Why, because that's what you were talking about. It's not specifically related to D&I, but what we know about, and what Simon Sinek talks about in that book, is how we often know what we do and we know how we do it, but we don't necessarily know why we do it. And understanding why is fundamental here in the D&I space. I don't know where that came up in these books, and I kind of lost track on which book that was. Is that Atomic Habits?
Which point, Jina?
When you were talking about understanding why we're doing things, and it's important to understand that, was that Atomic Habits?
Drive.
Oh, Drive. Sorry. Thank you. I think I read a different book by Daniel Pink. And so just, I want to remind everybody to drop your questions into the Q&A box. I'll be happy to pass them along. We actually don't have a ton of questions so far, which is great. I know somebody did ask about the slides, and I know you should be able to download the slides here, but there aren't a lot of slides because these tend to be general conversations that are covering a topic. just a discussion one-on-one. So I'm going back to your list, and you have down here DEI decision making. Who makes the DEI decisions? Is it the leader? Does the leader suggest them, but does the leadership have to make the decisions? And I mean organizational leadership now.
Right. I think that it should be, a partnership or, collaborative effort. I think here, decision making is around, and I spoke to this a little earlier, is what kind of, autonomy does this individual, will this role have to make executive decisions? There are different titles, different roles ranked differently in different organizations. And so the decision making is going to look a little different. But what I had in mind as, a talking point for this was, is this role going to have a seat at the table? What has been a struggle for, I've heard from, colleagues is having the title, but not being at the table and having the exposure to where decisions are being discussed and decisions are being made. So that you're able to, to contribute. I can say that, in HR, one of the points of tension with my colleagues just within that space is being brought to, business discussions early, especially relative to talent, but being brought in early enough that we're able to contribute and help to ideate before, something gets rolled out where we're then having to react. So for a DEI leader, similar situation is if there are, decisions or considerations, making sure that the appropriate functions are at the table, which of course includes this role. The other part is around decision making is the visibility. And again, I spoke to this a little earlier. That's being visible both leadership, but then also having the visibility with your workforce, so that this role should be able to easily liaise between the two, so that if there's information that might not directly get communicated to, a leadership team, this role has enough exposure to be able to translate some of that, that intel as appropriate to provide the appropriate, to offer, ideas and solutions to address some of the concerns that may not always formally ripple up to the leadership space.
It's funny. Every time you're talking, I'm like scribbling all these notes down, and so I wrote down autonomy ? And then I also wrote down DEI beyond HR. Because a lot of DEI roles generally are HR roles. That's been my experience. But are you starting to see those branching out beyond just the people conversations?
I do. And I think that, even though I didn't necessarily, specify business acumen as one of those core competencies, I do think that, for any role, even within HR, I'll go as far to say include HR as well, having stronger business acumen is becoming more and more important. Yes, traditionally there is some, tentacle of DEI within the HR space. But again, if your organization, if most of your opportunity or where you're intending to start is as it relates to talent processes, then naturally this role is going to have, a close tie to that. What you don't want to do is limit it to that, because their opportunity to have the business impact, when we think about supplier diversity, when we think about marketing, when we think about other areas of business impact, this role would need to have the space to be able to, to comfortably branch out of that, and not be limited to that, then having to only work out of the HR area of operation.
Right. We know we're seeing things more like community and social responsibility, vendors, relationships with vendors. Right. You just talked about, I also thought about technology, just thinking about what we've been through with COVID and this rapid, almost instantaneous overnight work from home business culture that we have.
Yeah.
The impact of those changes has been disproportionately felt by those who are in, not in the most privileged of socioeconomic groups, put it that way, or that are generally more underrepresented groups. And so even thinking about technology bringing the DEI leader in to help figure out what the right software, protocols, tools. Does everybody need a laptop? Who do we give a webcam? If we think about environments, do we have to give people green screens? Like, what is it that we should be thinking about? Because one of the things about DEI that we know has been happening over the last year is we can see into people's homes. Right now, I'm on camera. Maybe thankfully you're not, but I am. And I'm on camera. And the wall behind me is a bright orange. It was not intended to be that bright. I thought it would be better as a background than it is.
It's a lovely. No.
Yeah, thank you. But I keep saying I'm going to paint it, but you know, painting, it's exhausting. I'd rather do 10 tax returns than paint that wall. And you know, the bookshelves that are back there and the way that they're, what's on them, I'm very mindful of the fact that that's on camera. And not everybody has the choice that I have. I'm in a room that I got to decorate the way I wanted in theory. This is, it feels like maybe it's a silly conversation, but in reality, we know that there are a lot of people who are from different minority groups. And I say minority here as in the people in an organization who are the minority as compared to the people who are the majority in an organization. Back to the example, if I worked in a firm and 95% of the employees in that firm or that company were men, then I'm in the minority from a gender perspective. And if I'm in a minority from a gender perspective, does it change the conversation? So now, Jessica, it's you and I in a Zoom. And okay, I just made you a guy, but you and I are in a Zoom. And my decor in the background is very feminine, effeminate, based on at least our cultural norms. Does that potentially put me in a disadvantaged position in terms of reinforcing gender stereotypes? I mean, that's what I'm thinking about when you think all aspects of the business, simple questions like tech and the DEI leader, really?
Right. So, you know, I think this is as significant as this particular thing concerning background is more of a tech solve, and that part of the etiquette that we learned when everyone had to make the unplanned shift to working from home and going on camera was around blurring your screen. So having the blurred background option and teaching people how to do that quickly, and even getting creative with, you know, the apps that, you know, people are able to adapt or, you know, upload. You can be sitting at the beach for all I care if that's your backdrop, but blurring the screen to help keep some space between your professional and your personal world. I think the larger discussion as it you know, related to the D&I piece was around the just the mental and the social transition that people were making for those who relied on their workspaces to you know, that was their socialization, or for people who, you know, that stat we had earlier from the first polling question, who maybe initially felt trapped being at home, not having this dedicated space to work out of. So for those who had their camera in their background was their bedroom, neat or not, but we were in their personal space, but they didn't have a choice, you know. So those were the kinds of things that we, you know, we talked about. The mental health of it all is just, you know, social isolation, and helping people to, you know, how to manage that on camera. So this is the part you can't blur out, is if, you know, you're overwhelmed with what's going on in the world, but you got to get on camera and you have to smile. So are we going to make it a rule that people have to have cameras on, or are we, you know, going to leave it to people's, you know, do you still have the same connectivity? If you've got a, you know, a meeting with 5 people and everyone's camera is off, is that the same? So those were the kinds of conversations. But from a technical standpoint, as technical as what you described, one of the immediate solves for that was, you know, here's an app with all these different background options. You know, so just have a background on for the most part, but just people's, you know, not being able to have the choice to transition in what everyone's, you know, work from home environment looked like, and the social aspects is what we tried to give emphasis to being sensitive and making room to talk about, to understand people's needs.
And, you know, it's interesting because DEI is really about valuing the differences. And a lot of people put when they think about DEI, it goes into the bucket of race,
Mm-hmm.
gender, disability, LGBTQ community. And if it's not one
Yeah.
of those groups, it's not DEI. But you were just talking about mental health and wellness, which organizations have come to really understand. And that manifests itself differently for different people and all of our different needs. And so I think it's just another example of when we talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, we're talking about something that's 360 degrees part of the organization. It's not just, let's count up all the people based on race and see where we are.
Right.
Let's measure the number of men versus women and see where we are. Are we where we
Right.
want to be?
Right. And representation certainly plays its part, and it's important. That's critical. But where in, say in an ideal world where those dimensions and things that you just expressed were all equal, if people still don't feel like they belong, we've not done what we've set out to do. So it's not enough to just have, diversity exists. We don't manage, we don't, it is what it is, from a representation standpoint. Are there opportunities with that? Absolutely. But the inclusion is what takes effort. Making sure that people feel like they belong is important. How we go about doing that in an equitable fashion is where the impact is. So what I just discussed and what we just talked about in terms of the technology, those things all transcend all of the groups that you just named. It wouldn't matter what your race, your gender, what your sexual, orientation or identity is, to still have been impacted by the things that we just discussed as a part of last year, and even going into whatever the future of the workplace looks like. I mean, we're already there, but now the conversation is, how do we accommodate that in a way that still helps people to connect with company culture, to still have the visibility to grow and develop, and just to connect, as human beings. That's our nature. And so how to do that in a way in which we can still keep people safe, how to still manage expectations for those who've adjusted well and prefer now to be able to have the balance they've been able to achieve as a result of, this new working condition, have that anyone and everyone's impacted by that.
So I'm looking at the time. We have maybe 10 minutes left. There are a couple questions here that I've been holding, so we'll come back to those. But before we do that, I don't know if you want to speak for a few minutes here. You had programs and initiatives.
Jina, this is Beryl. Can I do the third poll question before we get to your next question?
Yeah, go ahead. Let's do that.
All right. I'm launching poll question 3 of 4 on your screen. What is the most valuable quality of a DEI leader? Charisma, passion, business acumen? Prefer not to answer. This is the third of 4 polling questions. We will have one more question in our time allotted today. If you've missed any of our other poll questions, please make sure to get your answer in quickly.
Somebody said they like my background. Thank you. It's one of the things I remember the first time I did a webinar on this platform. I thought, where's the blur? There is no blur. So I'm looking
We'll
at
leave this poll question. Oops, sorry. We'll leave this poll question open for about 10 more seconds.
I'm just sort of chattering so that we don't have that dead time during the poll questions. Jessica, I could have asked you to sing, but now I know better.
We'll close this one down in 3, 2, and 1. Here are your results. And I'll pass it back over to you.
So I see 55% say passion, 20% business acumen, and 14% charisma. Do you find those results surprising at all?
I am. I mean, on the one hand, I'm not. Passion brings energy, to talk about, what it takes to learn and how to understand and appreciate, others. So on the one hand, I'm not. And I do want to make a point to emphasize that it's not to dismiss people who are passionate about this space. That's not it at all. What I am saying is that along with passion, being able to then put that in a framework to create strategy, to set goals, to then measure the goals, to ensure that you're making traction, wouldn't be, any good to have the same conversation year over year, and you're not seeing any growth or impact from it. So I do want to emphasize that I'm not disregarding people's passion. You absolutely should have that, and it's contagious, and that should create, passion across the board. But the skill set and the knowledge and learning that goes along with then activating the passion in a way that has a business impact is what should not be undervalued for someone leading in this space. So the business acumen, absolutely. You wouldn't want someone who's only business, but it's not any fun to talk to or listen to or engage in a conversation. So you do have to have a little bit of both. I just wanted to emphasize that there is, in fact, a toolkit that an effective DEI leader will bring in order to have the greatest impact and value add to substantiate the commitment to having someone leading in this space for growth over time.
So I'm changing my question because of something you just said. You have on here for competencies manager versus leader. And so we have about 3 more minutes. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Sure. So again, titles for this, for people who are dedicated to this space are going to vary. So conceptually, a manager is, it's more of a tactical role. They're focusing on how things get done. They lead and oversee processes and events, and have the technical skill set. A leader will have that in addition to being able to bring focus on what matters to people and leading those people and ideas. They're responsible for empowering others, empowering, educating, and enabling other leaders. So if you've heard that expression that leaders don't create more followers, they create other leaders. That's the distinguishing factor, is that, you can have someone who can create and build out programs. That's very different than the person who's going to engage and encourage ongoing discussion to help them lead behaviors, to have a more, scalable and sustainable impact over the course of time.
So I want to make sure I give some time. We have a couple minutes left. There are a few questions here. So you said having the skills to solve. All right, let me just try reading. How about that? So having the skills to solve the today DEI problem is not enough. You have to understand the changing problem and keep up. That's more of a comment. Any thoughts in response?
I agree. I think we touched on that earlier, is that the landscape continues to evolve, because as people we do. So having someone who's has the space and the bandwidth to stay abreast of those things and bringing those implications, to the workplace as it relates to thinking about how to adapt policies and practices. Absolutely. True statement.
This is another true statement in here. It says that even if you're tapped as a DEI person, if you don't have the authority or the money, then you can't really implement those ideas. So I'm just agreeing with that comment. That's all. Somebody made a comment here, and I think they were intending to sort of just send a comment in the background, but I think it matters in a different way. So the comment says, if someone would judge you for what's in your room, those people don't matter. But we do know people get judged by the things that other people that you can see all the time, and that can happen with a disproportionately negative effect on those who are other than the majority.
Yeah. So quick story. In a town hall a couple of years, as a virtual town hall, I got feedback about leaders having their backgrounds on, and they were in their massive homes, or someone was saying my boathouse, for the weekend, and people, it kind of backfired, if you will. So that's why, encouraging people to use the blurred screen or using some other, backdrop was preferable, just to kind of mitigate some of that. But at the same time, for me anyway, it was always just a little insight into who that person was. It wasn't a judgment at all. It was just like, oh, wow, this is just a little bit about who they are. But from a judgment standpoint, it can go either way.
So this last question, and then we're going to have to wrap this up. It says, do you feel that D&I barriers are generational, culturally, and if, like here in the US, both something else?
I'd say both. Like we've mentioned, the conversation around DEI, the nature of the workforce has changed over time. I think that largely that is generational / societal, but there are also cultural nuances as well. Cultural nuances can be, domestic or international, but I think it's a combination of all.
I know some people are itching for a polling question. So before we go to that last polling question, I just want to thank Jessica for joining us. And I want to invite all of you to come back again. As I mentioned before, this is a bi-weekly series. It runs every other Friday. 2 weeks from now, I'll be joined by Lisa. I am afraid to say her last name because I will get it wrong, but she has a company called Inclusion Ally, and she's going to be talking about what that means. And so otherwise, I would say our contact information is there. We have on the bio slide for Jessica at the bottom, her contact information. Mine is here at the end of the slide. You're welcome to reach out to us if you have any questions. And so maybe, Beryl, we can do that last polling question. And then if there's time, we can do one more from the Q&A.
Of course, I'm going to go ahead and launch our fourth and final polling question. On a scale of 1 to 5, how cool are you? 5 being very cool, 4 being cool, 3 a little cool, 2 not so cool, or 1 what does cool even mean? If you've missed one of our polling questions for any reason, make sure to cast your vote now. We'll leave this poll open for just about a minute.
So, I mean, if the audience is mostly in the accounting profession, I'm so expecting everybody to go with very cool. I'm just saying. I mean,
I certainly hope so. It looks like the majority right now, 34% is saying very cool.
Isn't that the reputation of an accountant, that accountants are cool? See, wait, Beryl, are you laughing at that? What's going on? All right, we're going to see.
I was not laughing.
We have a few more seconds here before it closes.
10 more seconds. And I'm going to shut down our final poll in 3, 2, and 1.
And I'm back.
There are the results.
There you go. 35%, 33% said very cool, and 22% said cool. Let's see. So 55% were cool or very cool. I'm going to accept that as a win.
Yeah,
Jessica,
they're just being modest.
What was it?
I think that 7% of not so cool, they're just being modest.
Well, I saw a comment that comes in here and said, modestly cool. And perhaps that should have been one of the choices because, CPA's accountants preserved. Well, Jessica, seriously, thank you for joining us. As always, I enjoy these conversations and, you and I are going to have more, but I'm grateful that you were willing to join me and have this conversation on camera.
Thank you, Jina. Thank you, everybody, for participating today.
And
right, are we ready to wrap for today?
Yep, that's it.
Thank you so much, Jina and Jessica. We appreciate having you with us today. And with that, we have come to the conclusion of today's webinar. We here at CPA Academy will process credit later today. That, along with a copy of this webinar and handouts, will be available in your CPA Academy accounts within 24 hours. And if you look in your email inbox, you will find the evaluation for this webinar. Thanks again to our wonderful presenters, Jina and Jessica, for a great presentation. We are always appreciative of your time and insights, and warm thanks to all of you in the audience for your participation today. Please check the schedule on our website for additional information, and we hope to see you on a future webinar. Have a great day, everyone.